So Argentina is in a very big crisis, guys. There's soaring inflation. Javier Milei is moving to destroy a ton of jobs as well. Plus, the country decided to reject the invitation from BRICS. So it's one disaster after the other. But something big just happened. Even though Milei is moving away from BRICS, China has extended an olive branch, and on the surface, this looks like Beijing is turning the other cheek. But there's a big strategic reason behind it. In our lead story today, China cuts tariffs on 143 Argentine exports amid tense bilateral ties. Despite moving away from the global south, Beijing is still helping Argentina by throwing them a trade lifeline. Argentina is of course happy about this, saying that effective immediately, prices will be lowered and the end consumer spending will rise. And here's what China did. It is now cheaper to export food to China. For example, tariffs on dry sweet corn and coriander seeds have dropped from over 10% down to zero. There's no tax imposed, and this is a very big deal. Chinese consumers can now pay less for Argentine goods. Remember, when there are any trade tariffs around, it's the end consumers that pay more. And that's why all the trade tariffs that Donald Trump threw on China back a few years ago, that actually hurt the American consumers more than China itself. People like you and me, we suffer the most. And by dropping the tariffs, this enhances the demand for Argentina's exports. This in turn can actually push up the selling price for Milei's exports. Argentina gets to earn more revenue through bilateral trade with China. So this move, guys, hands down helps Argentina grow their economy much more. Even though Milei lost the currency swap line with China, Beijing hasn't really abandoned them in their time of need, and the country is in total chaos. Milei is attempting a mission impossible. He's trying to make a big U-turn on decades of horrible economic policy, and the biggest crisis Argentina faces is once again inflation. Things are now officially out of control. Argentina's inflation crisis has surpassed 200%, making it worse than Venezuela. And that's a really low bar for comparison, but prices are still headed to the moon. With Milei shock and all reforms coming this year, a ton of Argentine consumers will see their buying power evaporate away. He's going to get rid of a ton of government jobs, and you couple that with inflation over 200%. This will literally crush consumer spending away. A lot of people are going to be poorer in a hurry. But the doom and gloom gets even worse. According to estimates, Argentina's inflation could reach an insane 500% in the first half of 2024. Understand what that means. If the US had a 500% inflation rate, that means a loaf of bread that costs $1 today would cost $5 a year later. Inflation is so bad that Argentina is moving to issue 20,000 peso notes just like Weimar Germany. Their currency is inflating away, and the 20 grand note isn't a huge amount of money either. That's equivalent to a $20 Andrew Jackson bill, and this is only going to get worse as inflation rises towards 300 or even 500%. Don't be surprised, guys, if Argentina starts issuing peso bills with 5 or 6 zeros on them. It's becoming like monopoly money. And what Argentina has is a terrible US dollar shortage. That's the primary reason why their inflation crisis is getting worse than in Venezuela. Comparing their inflation rates, we see something really interesting. Venezuela's inflation is coming down fast from over 300% in October to under 200% in December. At the same time, Argentina's inflation rate is climbing steadily, hitting 220% last month. The reason revolves around the supply of US dollars in the country. Venezuela's supply of dollars is increasing while Argentina's dollar supply is dropping. Now, back in October, the US suspended their financial sanctions on Venezuela, and that allowed Maduro to sell oil to America and start earning more US dollars. Argentina, however, has the exact opposite issue. Their exports are collapsing and their supply of dollars is cratering to hell. They are simply importing more than what they export out to the world. Looking at Argentina's balance of trade, we can see how pervasive this disaster is. Since March last year, they have been losing US dollars with huge drawdowns month after month. They drained away 1.8 billion in June and most recently another $650 million in November. The longer this continues, the worse Argentina's inflation rate is gonna get. That's why Milei is cutting away a ton of government jobs and he's trying to enact draconian reforms. He's trying to destroy demand at the source, and he can't do it with interest rates because no one takes the Argentine peso seriously anymore. And I'll put it simply, Javier Milei is in a desperate scramble for time. He needs to get Argentina's dollar reserves back up before it's too late, before it's game over. The end game is something that we can literally see. Argentina's foreign exchange reserves are collapsing in real time. Milei has around $17.4 billion left in the bank. If Argentina burns $1 billion a month to stay afloat, it's all over by the end of 2025. And that's why we are seeing him do a ton of financial wizardry to postpone the apocalypse. Cutting jobs might lower the need for imports because people will be too broke to buy anything, right? But that isn't enough either. Importers need dollars to pay their suppliers in the meantime as well. And this is where Milei has done something quite smart. He has managed to delay a financial Armageddon by getting people to buy his bonds. From Bloomberg, Argentina's importers buy bonds in a turnaround for Milei. The central bank managed to sell nearly $1.2 billion of Argentine bonds by changing the rules. Now, these are special bonds. Importers can buy these bonds using the Argentine peso and get US dollars in return when the notes eventually mature. Initially, over 90% of the bonds went unsold because importers were still afraid. If Milei defaults holders of the bonds, the importers will get virtually nothing, not even the pesos that were put in initially. But Milei just threw a curveball. Holders of the bonds can now transfer the dollars they raise from selling the bonds on the secondary market directly to their foreign suppliers. And I'll translate this simply. If you're an importer, you can use your pesos to buy these bonds. Then you can take these bonds and you can dump them to other investors in the world. The dollars you get from the sale, the proceeds, can be used immediately to pay your foreign suppliers. And this is financial engineering at its finest. This helps to pay suppliers in the short term and keep the show going. The circus is still in town. And let me get this clear, it doesn't solve Argentina's problem of falling exports, but it does allow Milei to transfer the risk of these bonds to foreign investors greedy enough to buy these importer bonds. Alright guys, I must say this is a brilliant move to keep the wheels turning. The risk has been transferred back to the global investors. However, that isn't nearly enough either. Argentina still owes suppliers around $30 billion. Unless Milei gets Argentine exports moving again, holders of the bonds will dump them like hot potatoes. Newer ones also won't get sold. Milei has successfully fought a delay action battle. So far, his financial wizardry seems to be working. Milei has honored an existing $1.5 billion interest payment to bondholders. He has also managed to reach a deal with the IMF. The IMF has agreed to unlock $4.7 billion for Argentina. This is good news, but once again, this is just a tactic to delay a financial collapse. The entire economy has to restructure. Milei has to boost the private sector and increase his exports. As an emerging economy, the only way to earn US dollars is to sell more stuff to the world. There's no other solution. Financial engineering is not enough. And this is where China's trade lifeline works. By reducing the tariffs, Argentine producers can now earn more from the Chinese consumers. When taxes goes down, demand goes up, which in turn brings in more business for Argentina. China buys a ton of Argentina's exports. 93% of soybeans and almost 100% of barley heads to China. China is helping to bolster their industry. Now, is this pure altruism? Of course not. This isn't a charity case. China stands to gain as well. 25% of Argentina's imports comes from China after all. If Argentina sells more stuff to China, they can earn more yuan, which can then be recycled back to Beijing for imports like computers and chemicals. Even though Milei is moving away from BRICS, China is more focused on business and earning more money. And here's another reason why Argentina needs more dollars. They have to comply with a US court ruling to pay up $16.1 billion to investors of their national oil company. It's a rather complicated case, but the end game is simple. Judgment has been passed. Unless Argentina finds over $16 billion in cash, investors can move in and go after their sovereign assets. So you can see the tremendous pressure Argentina is really under. They already have debts to pay from their bonds, and now their stuff could get taken away. They need more dollars. Milei is running out of financial lifelines, guys. There's no guarantee that the IMF will extend more money going forward, and there's a real domestic crisis coming real soon. Now, as bad as this sounds, Milei is still in the honeymoon stage of his presidency. Everything is relatively smooth sailing by Argentinian standards, but a firestorm is coming. Milei's reforms has been suspended by Argentine court. He wants to reform the entire economy in one radical swoop, but of course, The system is fighting back against him. He's going head to head with the labor unions who obviously don't want him to slash jobs. If we look at his reforms, it's easy to tell who the big losers will be. Here are just four examples of what Milei wants to do. His administration wants to privatize all the state-owned companies. Aerolíneas, the country's largest airline, will also be controlled by private parties. He wants to deregulate satellite internet services and also eliminate price controls on healthcare plans. Basically, a huge privatization spree that will lead to massive job losses across Argentina. Now, we know Argentina has a big efficiency crisis and the public sector is extremely bloated. There are just too many workers. But to slash jobs now while inflation is soaring is also a very risky move. When you threaten people's livelihoods, there's going to be a ton of backlash. On January 24th, Milei is going to face a nationwide strike in protest against the measures. That means productivity is going to collapse on that day and the weeks going ahead. Just imagine if the entire country goes on strike. Even if it's just 10% of people, we'll see big parts of the economy grind to a halt. A strike can last for days, it can last for weeks or even months. If this drags on, just imagine what it will do to export production. Argentina's bonds will also collapse because investors will be terrified of a default, so they aren't out of the woods yet. And we have said before that the best solution for Argentina is to obtain a US dollar swap line from the Federal Reserve. The US has to step up, they have to help out. If Argentina is moving closer to America, this should be a no-brainer, but it's going to be tough. Getting a dollar swap line with the Federal Reserve isn't easy. Only a few countries like Canada, the EU, and Japan, they have an unlimited swap facility with the US. Argentina needs something like that. They need to exchange all their pesos for US dollars directly to fund their liabilities. And the amount of money they owe is simply crazy. Their total sovereign debt exceeds $400 billion, of which over 100 is owed to the IMF itself. Everything we have seen so far is simply delay tactics to avoid a default. It's postponing the day of reckoning. However, a swap line with the Federal Reserve, that will be a solution. But so far, I don't see the US extending any help to save Argentina's economy. Now, it's not all doom and gloom. There's one bright spot, which is their agriculture industry. The drought that destroyed Argentina's exports is starting to reverse. They are on course to produce their best soybean crop in 5 seasons, coming in at 52 million metric tons. And this is big because it accounts for over a quarter of Argentina's export revenues. Thanks to heavier rains from El Nino, Argentina's soybean exports are about to hit back up this harvest. It will be a 160% increase over the horrible output back last year. And this is good news for both Argentina and China as well. China can now import more from Argentina and will likely corner their soybean market. At the same time, Argentina earns more money as well, so it's a win-win proposition here. But realize that this is just one bright spot in a sea of darkness. Whether Argentina survives or collapses depends on a ton of things. Milei needs to delay the inflation crisis further, and his radical reforms could backfire really badly. He has to prevent that. This economic mess is still far from over. And as always, let me know what you think, guys. Why is China really helping Argentina out? And can Milei solve the inflation crisis? Let me know in the comments below. Stay safe, be sure to smash the like button and subscribe as we navigate through these crazy times.